And welcome back to the Justin Thurber Show. And as always, my co-host extraordinaire, Jim. How are we doing today, Jim?
Doing good. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Hi. Really quick, before we get into what we're talking about today, how did you make out in last week's election?
I won.
What a great job.
I,
At least someone won. Maybe we should change this to the Jim Davidson
at,
show.
at first, I thought I got the most votes in town because I didn't have any opponents, but there was a few other people that didn't have opponents. So I think there was like one or two other people that had a little bit more, but it was close. But yeah, it was good. Good overall election. Great results. So yeah, looking forward. Our first planning board meeting is tonight, so
Nice.
that'll be interesting. I'm kind of like the new kid on the block, so we'll see how that goes.
Well, congratulations, and thanks for doing that and stepping up. We need more good people like you to get involved in politics to hopefully change things for the better. So, on this episode, we're going to discuss Justice Gorsuch and the comments he made about the COVID emergencies, how immigration is hitting home locally and nationally, and finally, we're going to look at the Harvard Harris poll on the approval and mood of the country. So let's get into it. So obviously everyone knows in the last couple of years there's a lot of things that went on. I think a lot of people around the country, including myself, was wondering, hey, where are the judges? Where are the lawsuits? Where are the lawyers? A lot of this doesn't look right or seem right. And this past week, after Title 42 and all that mess with immigration at the border, I guess the Supreme Court was ruling on it, and Justice Gorsuch made some comments. So I'm going to read the comments he made, and we can discuss it. So Justice Neil Gorsuch had a lot more to say, leveling harsh criticism of how government from small towns to the national capital responded to the gravest public health threat in a century. The justice, a 55-year-old conservative who was President Donald Trump's first Supreme Court nominee, called emergency measures taken during the COVID-19 crisis that killed more than 1 million Americans perhaps the greatest intrusion on civil liberties in the peacetime history of this country. So, if we could discuss this right off the bat, you can tell how this article's going. This justice, who his whole life has been dedicated to law and being a judge and looking at the law and how things are supposed to run, made a comment that these people don't like. So, what they're trying to do is undermine his valid points by giving credence, I guess you would say, to, oh, 1 million people died, and it was perhaps, it was a national emergency and all this other stuff. Like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. And I think this is the failing of the schools, maybe not having as many civics classes, people not understanding what rights are. I don't know about you, but when they say like unalienable God-given rights, it's not government-given rights. And the reason why they were said that way means no one should be able to take them away. And I think what a lot of people want to do is they want to say, hey, listen, your rights really aren't rights. Because if we can take your rights away, they're just, I don't know what you'd call them, right?
Gifts.
Gifts?
Yeah,
I don't
the two things that stuck out to me on that were the most deadly virus to hit mankind. And again, most deadly for who? Because clearly different age demographics had different risk levels to the virus. So to say
Yes.
that it was just as deadly for young people as it was for elderly people is false face.
So this article kind of goes on because then he said he pointed out to orders closing schools, restricting church services, mandating vaccines, and prohibiting evictions. His broadside was aimed at local, state, and federal officials, even his colleagues. Good, good. We had the data at the beginning, whether you agreed with it or not. We had a lot of data, but one of the things you heard throughout the whole pandemic was we were going through an emergency, and we haven't seen something like this in 100 years. And when the Constitution was made and the Bill of Rights and all this other stuff, they never would have seen this. But people kept telling them, historians kept telling them, when this stuff was going on and they were signing these things, they were living through a pandemic themselves. And I think what happens is they knew, our founding fathers knew that if you could say an emergency overrides your rights, that eventually tyrannical governments would find emergencies to override your rights.
Yeah, exactly. It's and again, it's not like this was the first emergency in mankind either. It's not like this was completely unprecedented. There was numerous emergencies, numerous sicknesses. You can go down the list that happened before the Declaration of Independence. So obviously, this is something that they knew about, and they didn't
Yes.
write that. There's no amendment to the Constitution that says, "Oh, all these are suspended if there's a there's a coronavirus outbreak."
I think one of the big problems, and the reason why I wanted to bring this particular article up. I'm glad the Supreme Court justices, a lot of them don't speak out. I mean, every once in a while they'll speak out. I'm glad he's speaking out. I wish more people would speak out because there's a lot of things that now that we're through it, or people think we're through it, that we have to look back and say, this should never happen again. I'm sitting here and like, you can't close schools down. You can't close churches down. You can't mandate things. And, I know people get in arguments with me, and there's a Supreme Court case it was from Massachusetts actually, but even how the people use that case isn't a correct application. The guy that said he didn't want a shot during the last outbreak in Massachusetts, they didn't force him to get it. They gave him a $5 fine. So I think what's happening is there's a big failing by a lot of people. I think a lot of people are afraid, and we shouldn't govern based on fear. We shouldn't make laws and policies based on fear. And here's my thinking, especially through all this. If we don't have people in charge that can be level-headed and not fearful during times of crisis, they should be removed. I mean, sometimes I think of it this way: like you're watching a war movie or some sort of movie where there's a lot of action going on, and maybe things are going on, and people are, either getting shot at or buildings on fire and stuff. And you have this person going absolutely crazy, like, "Oh no, what are we gonna do?" and starting to do all the stupid stuff. Would people follow that person, or would they follow a level-headed person that says, "Hey, listen, we need to do this," and is under control and has composure, right? I would follow that type of person. And maybe what we should do is change the laws that if you're losing your mind during an emergency, you should probably lose your job as a political figure.
And I think the biggest question out of all this is, where are the results? Where are all the lives that were saved in the data of going through all these emergency powers, of all these shutdowns? So you would think that, if you had states that opened up, states that stayed relatively open, Texas and Florida, they would have significantly more damage to them from the virus than states that stayed in lockdown, like California and New York. And when you look at the data, it's almost the exact opposite. The people in the states that opened up built up natural immunity quicker.
Yes.
And not only just from the virus was there not there's no statistical difference that the in most cases the places that locked down got hit harder by the virus, and not even counting all the damage that was done from locking the economy down, then opening it back up, then locking it down, and then the vaccine mandates, which a lot of people are having health reactions to, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. The other thing I think that should happen is, if Supreme Court justices see this, right? Obviously, I think a lot of people saw like civil liberties were being denied, that any case should have been fast tracked. They should have fast tracked cases. Say, listen, this can't wait for the typical process of the Supreme Court. And you know what? The Supreme Court, I know they only take so many cases a year, and then they have recesses, and they do. You know what? Do your job. Do your job. If people's rights are getting trampled on, guess what? Especially during 100-year events. Well, I'm sorry that you happen to be the justices during this 100-year or every 100-year event. But you know what you can do? You can come in and do something and help people out. So let me get to the next page of this, because there's some interesting things on this too. So the emergency orders about which Gorsuch complained were first announced in the early days of the pandemic when Trump was president, and months before the virus was well understood and a vaccine was developed. The thrust of his complaint is not new. He has written before in individual cases that came to the court during the pandemic, sometimes dissenting from orders that left emergency decrees in place. So again, I think I like this guy then. He was dissenting. We shouldn't be leaving these emergency decrees in place, because that sets a bad precedent. If all it takes is an emergency for people's rights to go away, you don't have rights, especially God-given rights, right? Like that whole part about inalienable God-given rights was put in there to say you don't get them from the government. The government can't take them. The government can't mess with them. They're your rights, no matter what. No one can take them from you. And I think this was a travesty what we went through. Oh yeah. So here's the other one. I think like, it's always funny because it was 3 years. It seems like so long ago. It wasn't that long ago. This whole thing, but there was just so much that happened. So here's another one about the eviction moratorium. With Gorsuch and five other conservatives in the majority, they ended the eviction moratorium and blocked a Biden administration plan to require workers at larger companies to be vaccinated or wear a mask and submit to regular testing. Once Amy Coney Barrett joined the court after Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, they ended restrictions on religious services in some areas. So I paused for a second because I'm going to say it. I'll say it now. What they did, and a lot of people I think forget, is they used OSHA, or they were trying to use OSHA, to force companies with over 100 people in there to have to get the shot. So you have this unelected bureaucracy. Again, like we've talked about in how many episodes now, is they build these bureaucracies, and then what they do is they use their bureaucracies that you didn't vote for against you. So I think what they did is they said, "Hey, listen, we'll scare businesses, and no one wants to fight OSHA." I was working at a company, and they were like, "Listen, if OSHA comes down with this, we might have to because if OSHA just happens to show up to your business and you didn't do this, then you're in trouble and you're penalized and fined." Right? Like strong arming companies to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, one thing I was going to say, and a lot of it's still like uncertain. None of this stuff was coded into law. So you had situations where, like, if you went into a business, for example, you'd have the board of health cracking down on individuals in the town. That's what made me realize how important the board of health is in every single town, because
Yes.
they were the ones that were setting policy and really enforcing a lot of the stuff within individual towns. Obviously, you had the state and federal stuff going on too, but and I think that's still a gray area. If you get arrested for going into a store without a mask on, how can you be arrested? It's like there's no, it's not a law. So worst they can do is remove you. So not only do all these things infringe on your civil rights, but they create all these gray areas and kind of make up laws as they go.
Yeah. Well, he had a couple other good points in this article. He wrote, "One lesson might be this: fear and the desire for safety are a powerful force. They can lead to a clamor for action, almost any action, as long as someone does something to address a perceived threat. A leader or an expert who claims he can fix everything, if we only do exactly as he says, can prove an irresistible force." He also wrote, "The concentration of power in the hands of so few may be efficient and sometimes popular, but it does not tend towards sound government."
How
And I
many
and
times do we hear, "Oh, if it just saves one life, it's worth it. Oh, if it just saves one life," and it's like,
and
meanwhile, look at the
ex,
aftermath. You have all this damage that it's caused. It's taken
in
more lives.
experts, right?
Yeah.
That's the other thing. Like, oh, this person's an expert, and oh, if you do what we say, and oh, it was 2 weeks, 3 months, 2 years it turned into, and then what happened when things weren't obviously when things weren't going their way and things weren't. What do they do? Like politicians always do. Well, if those people had listened to me, we'd all be better. So blame those people, not myself. And that's another thing we really have to stop is and really be good at looking at is when politicians stop blaming other people for their inadequacies, we need to hold them to account. Plain and simple. It wasn't my neighbor doing something wrong. It wasn't this. You made these policies. These policies don't work. You should pay. But they're very effective at not taking the blame and pointing it on everyone else. There was one thing I disagree with him. The last sentence of this article I had, he wrote, "Make no mistake, decisive executive action is sometimes necessary and appropriate, but if emergency decrees promise to solve some problems, they threaten to generate others." So I still think that there's most emergencies out there that aren't really that big and aren't emergencies, and we should be adults enough to make our own decisions.
Yeah, and I think what you're talking about too is essentially skirting the process. So the way that the process is done is that your legislatures would meet. So you'd have your House and your Senate would meet to sign a law, and then your governor or the president would vote on it. And what these emergency actions are doing is they're pretty much thwarting that whole process and saying, "Hey, no, we're going to give it to the executive branch of government, whether it's a state or the federal, and they're going to be the ones that make the decision. Well, if it's that much of an emergency, then how about the legislature has an emergency meeting so that they can get stuff passed that's important. But by skipping that process, you're just consolidating power at the top.
And you bring up another good point, something similar to this, but you're starting to see it more and more. And a lot of these legislatures, whether it be state or federal, are willing just to give up their power so they don't have to deal with the repercussions of making decisions. So governors and presidents now, they rule through executive orders because it's easier to let that person do it and say, well, he's the governor, he's the president, and they put an executive order. And what can I do? Well, you're the branch that's supposed to make the laws, not them. They're not the law arm of the government. You're supposed to do that. So it's twisted. We really need to get it back. We need to have this stop this like you said, this consolidation of power into just a few people making decisions. Like I said, we've discussed that. We've discussed that in our state houses, and it's not just our state houses, it's state houses across the nation. But then when you look at all these state houses and they're all starting to mirror and mimic what they do, you kind of realize that they're probably being told by someone higher up the chain than them what to do. So this really has to be looked at. This consolidation of power, this government isn't supposed to work this way. It's supposed to be bottom up, and it's starting to be top down. And I hope articles like this get people thinking. I hope more and more people realize that this isn't how government's supposed to work. We're supposed to have a say and maybe work together more collaboratively to come up with better ideas for dealing with complex situations or emergencies. But, I agree with them. The last 3 years was just crazy on civil liberties.
Yeah, and speaking about government not operating from the bottom up, I think that leads us to our next topic here.
Yes. So as we've discussed lately, it seems like this thing's going on is immigration has hit home in Massachusetts, and actually part of my district is Taunton, and Taunton, Mass, is dealing with some immigration from people from Haiti. So what happened in 2021 is their president was assassinated, and since then, I guess their whole country is devolved, and things are getting bad, and people fear for their lives. So I don't fault anybody, for wanting a better life and wanting to come to America or go to some other country and leave something bad. I mean, I think a lot of people think America is starting to get bad and they're looking to go to maybe other countries. I've heard that. Where can I go? So the video we're going to watch and the discussion we're going to have isn't about immigration in the sense that, hey, we shouldn't have people come to America legally. I think what it is, again, is we have emergencies, and politicians, they just make rash decisions, don't really have plans in place, and it has long-term effects, kind of like, all these things kind of blend together. We're talking about, there was a COVID emergency, and you had these experts and all these people and threw money and policies, and then we're looking back and like, yeah, maybe we shouldn't have done all that stuff. And I think we're going down the same track with immigration. Like, people are leaving their countries for a myriad of reasons, but the answer shouldn't always be that we have to either take it on. Like, I think we need to work collaboratively with the countries these people come from and maybe other countries and say, hey, how can we help fix it? I mean, look, we're helping Ukraine with hundreds of billions of dollars, but we can't help Haiti? And that's where these people are from. So let me play some of this video and then we'll discuss it. And there's some doozies in it, though.
First at 5:30 tonight, a surge in southern New England. More than 100 families, some of which are migrants, are being temporarily housed in hotels across Massachusetts, including Taunton. Good to have you back with us. I'm Dan Janey.
And I'm Emily Bowles. NBC 10 Bristol County News Chief Jody Reed has learned how most of them got here and what's being done to help them establish a new life.
When you think of the crisis at the border, you don't typically think about Taunton, Massachusetts. But within the last month, that has changed. According to the Department of Housing and Community Development, 120 families, some of which are from Haiti, have been temporarily placed at the Clarion Hotel.
Ever since the president was assassinated there, just the political and the security situation have deteriorated so much that there's no safety there. people need to get out. And so that's one of the reasons why we're seeing so many people come here.
When I asked how the migrants got here, immigration experts told me they came on their own after crossing through a legal point of entry into the country. They presented their documents to
I had to stop right there. I love that. Like, how did they get here? They got here on their own legally.
Do you remember? I think it was like last summer. It was almost every day on the news. There was this bridge in Texas, and there was like thousands of people on the bridge. And each day there was more people under the
Yes.
bridge. And then it would just get more news coverage. And then all of a sudden one day there was like nobody under the bridge. And all of a sudden the media kind of stopped reporting on it. Well, I think we're starting to find out where all those people went that were under the bridge that day.
Yeah. So let's finish this out because again, there's a couple more interesting things, but I just wanted to. You would hope news, right? You want news people and people that report on stories to maybe give a little bit more. Hey, we asked these people how this happened. It happened. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The other part I like too is how they just give, oh, the president was assassinated, so that's why people are coming over. But they don't give any statistics. They don't give any data points. Oh, violent crime has surged by X amount, or these are the reasons why. It's just like, here's a statement, and then you're supposed to believe it.
So when I watched this video, I heard that, and I'm like, so the president was assassinated, so people should come over. So I looked into it, and I guess there's a lot of gang killings. It's I went to the State Department's website. They have a travel advisory. They advise you don't go there, and it's kind of bad. But that was in 2021. That was 2 years ago. And again, this goes to a lot of things I say. We're too busy trying to solve problems all around the world that maybe we should or shouldn't. But when there's problems that are directly affecting us, right? For example, the Ukraine kind of affects us, but Europe should probably be helping more. But Haiti's close to us. We have immigrants from there coming here. Maybe we should, hey, listen, instead of spending the millions and hundreds of millions of dollars we're going to spend on this, maybe what we can do is go down there, help them out, help them build their country. So, like I said, I think politicians want quick fixes, things to pat themselves on the back and say, hey, I'm doing something. But I don't think that's the right thing to do. So let's just finish this video really quick.
immigration officers and are now awaiting approval for work visas, which can take months to process.
Is that these people who are eligible for work authorization, it's taking so long for them to get it. They're not able to support themselves. These are people who want to be working. They want to have jobs. They want to be earning for their families.
While they wait for their work visas and a more permanent housing solution, the migrants count on organizations that provide support like housing and food, many of which are state-run, but the city of Taunton is responsible for doing the rest, something that Mayor Shauna O'Connell told us over the weekend she was not prepared for.
We are concerned. Having 400 people in a short amount of time just come into your community without us knowing is a challenge.
A challenge that certainly won't be solved overnight.
First at 5.
Yeah, so that's the other couple pieces of this. I'd watched another video where that Mayor O'Connell spoke, and the children of these families have to be put in schools. So I'm sure their English as a second language. I'm sure there's an expense to that. So in addition to them being housed and fed, probably clothed, there's the expense of education. And then we're in May right now, and you have a mayor of a town and doing budgets, and I'm sure like my town a couple weeks ago had a big budget thing and people vote on it, and they're like, hey, do we get a $60,000 vehicle, or do we get this fire truck for $850,000, or do we spend money on this? And everyone's like hemming and hawing like, hey, taxes are getting crazy. And all of a sudden you plop 400 extra people in the town that you weren't accounting for, and you have to now provide for them, which again, I believe we should help. But here's one of the funniest things is again, like I said, don't outsource your thinking. Something we talk about and try looking at these stories and how they're reported to us. The reporter said there's a bunch of organizations that are helping these people out. Now, in the past, these people would have been helped by churches or volunteer organizations that would help these people out, raising money, beds, everything. But again, we've allowed politics and politicians to get into these areas that probably were more efficient, probably done a better job, it would probably cost less. And what did the reporter say? Oh, these organizations, they're mostly state run. It's crazy.
Oh yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, like you said, in the past too, you look back 100 years ago, I think it was like 15 cents on every dollar was going to government, state, local, or federal. Today, it's over 50 cents of every dollar is going into the government. So you're looking at the ability of individual people to help at this point. You know, there's some that can, but then when you start adding in like the costs of goods and everything else going up, it's like pretty much individual people have lost their ability to help out because so much is going just to pay taxes and the cost of living that it pretty much has to fall on the state to take care of.
And you know, there's been a concerted effort against churches and you know, undermining them and labeling them as all sorts of phobes or racists or supremacists or whatever, just because politicians wanted to get in no space because they said, hey, listen, we want to take over the things churches do. Truthfully, I 100% believe that because they want to infiltrate every area of your life and they want to be your religion. So we've allowed, and like you said, I don't think everyone's allowed, but what's happened is they've made it way too expensive for the average person to do things and help out. So now they have to assume more of that responsibility because, again, as we always say, their policies don't make things better, they make it worse. And by making it worse, they get more power because they have to fix the problems that they caused. So I have another video to play too, which goes into a little bit more of this situation and how much this is going to cost. And this, I think, is going to get some people really like, wait, what? So let's listen.
This contract is not cheap. Between rooms and other expenses, the state expects to spend $2.6 million this fiscal year and $10 million next year. The hotel will submit an invoice every 2 weeks with expenses. The rooms alone are going for $123 a night, and then you have to factor in meals. According to the contract, the state has budgeted $37 per person for 3 meals a day. The state is also paying for other items like 24/7 front desk staffing, weekly housekeeping, and toiletries. If bed bugs are found, they'll pay a third party to come and remove them. The contract also has miscellaneous items that range from $1 to $1,000. The state tells us that's for one-off items the hotel may need to buy, like cribs for infants, for example. While the state is working on more permanent housing for these people, the contract has a very interesting clause in case they don't find it. Once the contract expires on June 30th of 2024, they can renew it for a year at a time for the next 9 years. For the NBC Tonight team, I'm Tamara Sakarzik.
So this year it's going to cost $2.6 million. Then every successive year it's going to cost at least $10 million. So, you know, you do the quick math. What's 10 million divided by 400, right? That's how many people? $25,000 per person. So then you do some other quick math. Well, if you're a family of 4, that equates to $100,000 per person that the state is going to use to help these people out.
And that's just housing.
Well, housing and food, right? They get their 3 meals a day of $37.
Well, like you said, they're going to be going into the education system. They're going to be using health services. They're going to be using all sorts of stuff. So that's probably like a quarter of the total cost once you start adding up all these other areas.
And again, I think the thing is, I think a lot of people sit there like, you're being heartless. I'm not being heartless, right? We've said this before. Charity should begin at home. There's a lot of problems that if we had capable politicians, we had capable lawmakers, we could actually fix problems. We could actually do things to solve problems. We could help homeless. We could help the elderly. We'd help the people on fixed incomes. We could do that. And then you know what else we could do? We could help other people that need help. The problem is because it's not their money and these politicians think that it grows on trees or they can just keep taxing the heck out of us, they don't care. They just spend it like it's crazy. Like the average household in my area, I think is like $90,000 income. You got a family of 4 living in a hotel and they're paying $100,000 for that family of 4.
You brought up a good point earlier too about actually investing in those countries to help them out, and I think that's what a lot of companies are starting to look at. So this term called offshoring is really popular for companies that want to hire teams in like India and all other parts of the globe. But recently, I've started to see a trend of companies looking. The term is called nearshoring. Yes. So what they're looking to do is start investing in the Central America region, just because there's so many benefits at hiring a worker there, not only like time zone, but like geopolitical risk and language barriers and everything like that. There's a lot of opportunity there.
Yes.
And as you were mentioning, so in order to invest in these communities, it's such a great opportunity that exists in a lot of those countries that are just untapped resources that, like, if we started focusing on there, we could really build up some of those countries so that you don't have these waves of people that need to come here, that they can essentially have a living and grow their family. Because most of them, like, I can't imagine anyone wants to like leave their country and go to a completely new place that speaks a completely different language than it's like, well, and
Well, listen, if you were paying me to go live in another country, I might do it.
right.
I might.
But yeah, it's like not someone's number one option is to like move their entire family into a completely new world. So I'm sure if the opportunity exists, a lot of folks would prefer to stay where they are, grow their families where they are, where they grew up in, and build a successful lifestyle at home.
Well, the other thing I did too when I was searching this, I saw a couple of headlines, and so I went to the New York Post's website and pulled these off because it was actually pretty cool. Well, not pretty cool, but kind of telling of what's going on around the country. Because again, a lot of times we talk about things that are local, but I think what people have to start to realize is that things that might be local here, it's not unique to here. It's happening all across the country, and I like I said before, I think there's people way high up that want to see these things happen, and in areas that they have influence over, they're making these things happen. So this first New York Post article, I don't know the day, May 13th, I believe it was, vets kicked out for migrants, outrage as upstate hotels tell 20 homeless veterans to leave. So you have homeless veterans, people who've paid taxes, served their country, being kicked out for migrants. And then here's another one we have. Kids sacrificed, it said. Now, obviously, this is to get people to buy their paper or to read the article. But what it's saying is parents furious as at least 7 New York City school gyms closed for migrant shelters. Again, this is kind of like putting the cart before the horse. We want to do good things, and you know what? For the last, I don't know, at least 6 years, right? Probably started with Donald Trump, with build the wall or whatever, and knowing there was immigration and influx of people wanting to come here, and our immigration policy hasn't been fixed and probably could be fixed, but again, no one wants to make decisions, is that we knew these things were coming and nothing's done. And then what happens is we get these reactionary policies that hurt people that live here. It's just, like I said, and I think I hate to harp on this, and I hate to always be like, we need to do something. And I know people feel like sometimes, like, what can I do? And that's why I always say, do something. Here's my speech again. Do something. Help a person run for office. Do standouts. Give money. Tell people about the show. Like and comment, just to get the word out. Even if you just say, hey, listen, I was watching a show and they were talking about this and they were talking about that, and talking with other people to get this in people's minds. Like, hey, listen, I was watching a show. They talked about Gorsuch, and here's the article, and you go find the article. We'll put it on in the comment section below for you to read too, if you want, or to share. But what they did for 3 years wasn't right. And hey, there's immigrants in Taunton, but they're also in New York, and they're also in Colorado and Chicago. They're going everywhere, and they're causing havoc. And they're not causing havoc. Our politicians are. They're just putting a Band-Aid over like a big wound that you need like to go to the hospital for. And they're like, look what I did. I did something great. No, you didn't. And you're making things worse. So whatever people decide they want to do, like I say, do something. It's not, look at Jim. I'm going to bring you up for a sec, Jim. Look at Jim. What's it, a year and a half ago? Did you think you'd be here doing a show or running for office and get elected?
Absolutely not.
Yeah. And there's a lot of people starting to step up and step out. And when those people that do that, and if you know them, support them. That's what they need. Because we need a bunch of people that have the support behind them with good ideas, with a desire to make a positive change, and the ability to question what is going on and not just question it, because anyone can say, hey, what are you guys doing? What are you guys doing? I could do better, right? And then you get there and you stink. What's your ideas for this? I think you and I had some good ideas. I like that term, nearshoring. That's a great idea. But I also say, like, why aren't we going to these countries and saying, hey, what do you have? How can we help your quality of life? What can we do? Like, have that cooperation. And you know, the other thing too is how do you think these countries are when you have a lot of young men and a lot of young women who are in their prime and should be like the main workers leaving the country? That doesn't help the country. Your able-bodied workforce is leaving. And the best thing about it, I didn't put these videos up. I'll use them again because I'm sure we'll talk about immigration again. But when you see a lot of Democratic leaders around the country get up and talk about immigrants, it seems like the only thing they think they can do is help keep our food prices lower by working in the fields or doing construction for cheap. And you sit there and you're like, so you're taking able-bodied people that have some skills and can do something from their country so we can get cheap labor? And we sit here and if you're a person that talks about immigration and you bring this up, you're the evil person. I'm not the evil person.
Right. And the thing that's sad about this whole situation too is if you put on a clip from George Bush Sr., these are clips from 1980s. They're talking about the exact same immigration problems that we're having today. These are 40 years ago. And the difference that between then and now is then it was this problem was just starting to surface and become noticeable to people. Whereas now I think we're pretty much at the breaking point where we're at the point where like communities literally cannot take this burden on top of everything else going on. And one example of that is I don't know if you saw, there was on social media, there was a post in Chicago, like at one of the inner cities in Chicago, there's a lady with a Build the Wall 2024 poster. And this is like in the inner city of Chicago. And I'm like, man, I mean, this is going to show you how much this is hitting home for people.
And again, I think in the abstract, when people don't think about things, like everyone wants people to be taken care of. So when a politician's like, don't you want these people to be saved? Don't you want these people to be taken care of? Obviously, it's yes. But then what happens is their answer for that, when people start realizing what the answer is, they're like, no, not like this. Like, there's better things we can do. But again, politicians don't want to find the best way. It might take a while. They just want the most expedient way so they can pat themselves on the back. Never have to look to see if what they did solved any problems, right? That's the other thing that I love about politicians. They implement all these things, and then no matter what happens, they could have wreaked damage and destroyed things. They don't care. Hey, at least I did something. And again, that's what Neil Gorsuch said. We can't have too few people doing stuff because they're going to do stuff, and then we have to suffer the consequences. So again, speaking about, that's kind of a nice transition when you said, you know, if you looked like at Bush's time in office and these are the same problems. The next thing we're going to move on to is the Harvard Caps Harris poll. And I thought this was actually pretty interesting, something different than we usually talk about, just to see how people are feeling about what is going on in our country. And it was actually pretty interesting. So this poll was conducted May 17th to May 18th. And it goes and tells you, you know, we were weighted for age, gender, region, blah, blah, blah. So this is the approval and mood of the country. So today, less than a third of voters say the country is on the right track. That's crazy, right? And again,
not surprising, but I mean, it you know, it's shocking. It shouldn't be that way, but it's like given the way things are going right now. I understand.
So 31% of the people responded saying that the country is not on the, no, 60% said that the country is on the wrong track. Holy cow. And then I never understood these polls that they don't know or unsure. I mean, if you're going to participate. Is the country on the right track? I don't know.
These are the people that, like, when you ask them what country they live in or what state they live in, they don't know.
Yes. All right. So another thing they asked is 2/3 believe the U.S. economy is headed in the wrong direction, right? So 62% of people, and the best thing is if you listen to the mainstream media, if you listen to certain politicians, they'll tell you that everything's better. We're building from the middle out, bottom up. everything's building back better, and you're sitting there, and I think most people like, are you out of your mind? And again, when I saw this, and the reason why I wanted to do this is when I saw this poll, one of the comments on it, and I think it was a good comment, is that politicians are out of touch with their people. They're sitting there telling you everything's great, and not everything's great. So unfortunately, I don't think they look at these things, and I don't know if they're isolated because, again, they get to make their pay raises whenever they want. They get the benefits that they want. So they sit there and like, hey, everything's great, while everyone else is struggling. So
yeah, I remember listening to I think Milton Friedman had a good point on like compensating politicians, where essentially the way that the system is set up currently, politicians get a same base rate plus all the per diems and all this stuff. It doesn't matter if they do a good job or a bad job, as long as they get reelected is essentially all they need to keep maintaining their salary. Whereas he was talking about potentially flipping the model completely upside down. So there's other metrics. So whether it's like GDP or happiness or like something else, it's like the amount of people that poll that the country's on the right track versus wrong track. There's so many other ways that we could compensate politicians to make sure that their values are more aligned with the people and actually improving the livelihoods of people versus just spitting out talking points that are going to get them elected.
Something has to change, though, right? Like something has to. It just can't be you have to wait 2 years or 4 years for a vote to get the people out. Like there has to be more mechanisms in place. I don't know what it is. Maybe there's some quality of life metric or something, but think about this. This is the next poll. They said perceived strength of the US economy overall remains well below 50%. And here's the other thing I wanted to talk about these polls is while these polls you can pull information out and we can sit here and discuss it, you always have to see how they present it. Because what did it say? It said the perceived strength of the U.S. economy overall remains well below 50%. If you look at the chart, it's 62%. So maybe you should said remains well below 60%, right? Because I'm looking back over the chart. The last time it was under 50% was in July of 21. That's crazy. So again, like sometimes these things, they want to put their little spin on it. It's really hard to find old versions of this poll, but I was able to at least find one, and we're gonna kind of compare some things and how they say some things. It's crazy. So
yeah. So just looking at that one real quick. So 70% had thought the economy was strong looking back in 2018, and then going back to today, what was the last number there?
Yeah,
8%,
62. Yeah, 38%. Yeah, it's down to 38%. Think it's doing good. So it's fallen. And then remember what happened in 2019 and 2020, right? So now it says half of voters continue to say their personal financial situation is worsening. So yeah. But again, this is the thing: is if you turn on the TV, and you, like you said, you listen to certain politicians, they're like everything's better under this presidency, and everything's better. I'm like, who for who? And again, there was that term that came out of the pandemic, the laptop class. Maybe that's who it is. But I think what's happening is they're starting to lose their job, and they're starting to realize like, hey, the economy isn't that good, and the jobs that I had that. Like that day in the life of Twitter, remember, did you ever see that video? That lady, day in the life of Twitter.
Yeah.
I woke up and I went to work for 10. And when I was at work, I got a coffee and did yoga, did nothing all day, but eat. And you know what I mean? And now that person's probably has to actually go work, and they're probably not making the kind of money that they were making at Twitter. And they realize like, hey, things aren't as good as I thought they were. So yeah, let's get to the next.
You just go down the list. I mean, the middle class has really been hollowed out here. I mean, look at housing is a perfect example. We're in a cyclical, just like a really bad place in the housing market, where people that bought the house bought it when it was like 20% of the value today, gained equity through all this time. Now all of a sudden you have newer people graduating college, and I couldn't tell you how many people we talked to on the campaign trail that was like, hey, my kids live with me in the basement. They're never going to be able to buy a house in this market. And I mean, that just goes to all the other cost of living things, but it's really owning a home that is really kind of like what sets you out to build a family and
Yes.
really start a life, building a life for your own. And right now they're just out of reach for so many people.
Here's where I wanted to get to in this poll too. Biden's approval has stayed level at just above 40% for the past several months. So, between strongly approve and somewhat approve, he's at 42, 43%. So when Trump was in office, his hovered around there 44, 47, 48%, right? Man, they crushed him. He's got such low ratings. Now it's like, oh, he stayed level at 40, just above 40%. I mean, I tell people all the time, I go, you're probably on each side, right? On the left and the right. You're probably going to have like 30, 35% of the people that no matter what, they're going to stick with them. They are ride and dies. And then you got the people in the middle, your other 30% that just go, man, I wish you people would get your act together, right? So it's not a good job. It's definitely not a good job. And the problem is, I don't know what we do. 40%, and the people think there's going to be a recession. And the next slide, which is crazy on this, is Biden's approval on management of key issues is weak across the board. The only thing that he's above 50% at handling is reacting to coronavirus, and that's at 52%. And at some points that was around 44% or whatever. And I think probably what's happened is because everyone thinks COVID's over now. They're like, yay, so the optimism is up. But the economy, he's at 39%. Stimulating jobs is 48%. This fighting terrorism, I don't get this anymore. Like, are we still doing that? I guess 46%. Dealing with violence and crime in the country, 39%. How is he 40% or 43% approval if most of his ratings are in the 30s?
Yeah, and I think the other thing that we'd see in this, if we compared to other presidencies too, I think probably the general trend is that almost all presidents, no matter what party, are going to be trending down to the unfavorable job rating quicker in their presidencies, just because I think in general people are getting fed up with politicians earlier than sooner in their careers too. So if you look back at like a Ronald Reagan or even a Bill Clinton, I'm sure, like I remember some of their poll numbers were pretty high for most of their presidencies. It might have dipped a little bit, but never that low. Where now we're seeing politicians dip pretty much unfavorable right off the bat. So I think that just speaks to how how people's standards of living have gone down, and I think that's reflecting in some of these poll numbers if you were to compare it to the past.
So it's funny. So like I said, I found another poll from this Harvard Harris poll, and it was from May 29, 30th of 2019. So I'm gonna share that. So May 29, 30 to 30th. And the funny thing is, right, again, how they say things. I was just looking at this while you were talking too. So GOP approval is just over 40%. And this was in 2019 at 42%. GOP approval is higher now. And they make it seem like, it's cratering. It's not that good. So like the GOP is picking up. And again, so sometimes when you read these things, and maybe that's why they don't keep too many that you can look back on, is to see how these things were worded, to see how they frame the question or the answer to the question. So yeah, perceived strength of the U.S. economy peaked in April, but remains high. So again, like, oh, it peaked in April. It's at 71%, the strength of the economy. Now people are at 39%, and they're like, oh, it's holding steady.
Yeah. Yeah, complete shift in the narrative, huh?
Right. So when we can't be honest, and when our media can't be honest, and we have institutions in place that now play to a side, unfortunately, I think what we have to do, one of two things, right? We either have to build our own institutions, or we have to, I don't want to say cancel the other institutions, but I think we have to disavow them. If you're not a legitimate if you're not given legitimate information, then you shouldn't be treated like a legitimate source. Now, again, what you have to do is you have to sit here, because they're one of the only ones right now, is you have to use this data. I understand that. But you also have to understand is you have to have the common sense, the knowledge to interpret this, and then also tell people, like, don't you see what they're doing? And critical thinking, I think, is key, and it's something that more and more people are going to have to learn to do. But I fear in our age of you can find a Google answer really quick and just search something, or have the chat GPT figure out something for you. There's a lot of outsourcing of thinking for people, and they need to take a step back and actually say, hey, listen, is this information that's being presented legitimate, fair, and balanced, or is this with an agenda?
So it's interesting you say that, because I was reading a Politico article about so Jim Jordan came to visit Massachusetts this weekend, and he visited the Lions' barn and did an event there. And in the Political article, it was like, controversial House Representative Jim Jordan stops in Massachusetts. And I'm thinking in my head, how many times have they put that label over a Democrat in a political article? Controversial U.S. Senator Elizabeth Warren. I bet you it's zero.
Never.
And I mean, it's just like, and that's the thing with the media today. It might not be, factually incorrect, and that's where they try to attack, misinformation. But when they're slapping these labels all over a news article, and it's really just plastered with their own opinion, it's like, to me, it might as well just be thrown out.
Well, it's funny you say that, because, like I said, I do a lot of research and thinking, and I 100% agree with you, because every time they talk about a conservative, it's far right. This far right person. You're like, come on, dude. So I have a new thing. We can tell Jim Lyons, we can tell Jim Jordan to start using this. Maybe we can make this a thing. We're just going to call them the militant left. Every time we talk about them, instead of Democrats, I'm going to say the militant left, Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah, I mean, it's no different than what they're doing today.
No, and we have to, because what happens is by not doing that, they win. So here's another slide. This is from 2019, and it harkens back to what I say about 6 years, 8 years, 10 years, they never fixed immigration. The top two issues for voters was immigration and healthcare.
The more things change, the more they stay the same.
Yeah. Man, keep electing these people that do nothing, right? Because it's worse now. It's worse. Like you said, in downtown Chicago, you have people saying, build the wall 2024. So do you think that number is going to be lower or higher? I think it's going to be a lot higher. But again, the politicians that we currently have elected, I don't know if they know how to solve the problems or don't care about solving the problems. But, like you said, the more things change, the more they stay the same. I think I've said this on the show before, and I've had this statement that I've made, is the only thing that's changed in my life is everything is in HD and 4K now. You still got the elderly that need help. You still got the people starving around the world. You still got the homeless. You have all these problems that have my whole life have been around, and everyone's gonna fix. And it doesn't seem like anything gets fixed, and sometimes it gets worse. So maybe we should try something different. Maybe we should actually try people that want to make a difference. And if you've been in office for 10, 15, 20 years and things have only gotten worse and taxes have only gone up, and they're not doing what you want to do, just vote them out.
Yeah, and until we come up with a system where you have politicians of complete opposite spectrums. I mean, imagine AOC and Ted Cruz, for example, getting into a room and actually working together on something on behalf of the American people, and both coming out saying that they support each other's idea. It's never going to happen in today's environment. It's much more, it adds much more value to them for their political capital, no matter what. If each one of them had a good idea, to bash it to their constituents and say, hey, no, that's wrong, and my way is better. And it's like that's going to add, they're going to get more votes at the end of the day doing it that way than if they were to sit in a room and say, hey, this person has a good idea, let's move forward in this direction, because everyone's going to benefit.
Well, that's why I like having you on the show, and that's why I like doing a show with you, because there's a lot of topics we discuss, and there's a lot of people we discuss, and they're politically don't align with us all the time. But I always tell my kids, reward the behavior you want to see. So as the auditor, and we had those discussions about the auditor, and she's doing a good job up at the State House. I will commend her. We might be far away on everything else, but I'll sit there and like, good job. And you know what the funny thing is? I'll get crap for that. Oh, she's a Democrat. I'm like, I don't care. We have to reward the behavior. If we don't reward the behavior of people we disagree with, we're never gonna find the commonality. We're never gonna find the things that we can say, hey, listen, we agree on these things. We can work together, and we need to. That's what we need to do. So, I hope people enjoyed looking at and listening to the Harvard Harris poll and just seeing how, the perception that a lot of these politicians have about how things are going doesn't actually meet the reality on the ground. I hope they listen. Who knows? Maybe because it's going to be an election season in the next year, maybe they'll start doing some things to make some changes to make things look better for like the 6 months they needed to look better. But I also think it's funny. And another thing we have to do is sit here and look at how the information we're getting to us, if it's fair, if it's even, if it's trustworthy, or if it's just more propaganda to push a narrative. So, Anthony, you have Jim?
No, that's it.
All right. Well, hey, thank you everyone for listening to the Justin Thurber Show. Join us next week. We're going to have another great show. And again, as always, Jim, thank you very much. And you have a wonderful day.
Thanks again.
Thanks.